Present SCR 76, which recognizes the 158th anniversary of Juneteenth, better known as Independence Day, Freedom Day, Emancipation Day. It's a day that marks a significant point in American history when slaves were made aware of their freedom. 2.5 years after President Lincoln had signed the Emancipation Proclamation, stating that all enslaved individuals were free. It's the oldest African-American holiday in the United States. It celebrates the fulfillment of the promise made by President Lincoln in 1963 to end slavery in the United States. And it's only one of 11 national holidays that exist in this country. 2.5 years after signing the Emancipation Proclamation, Union soldiers led by General Gordon Granger rode into Galveston, Texas to inform the 250,000 plus slaves living in Texas that they were free people. Freed slaves turned this historical event into a yearly celebration. And many times people want to stereotype African Americans as great lovers of watermelon, red soda pop, or other things of that nature. But if they knew our history, they would know the significance of the red, the significance of the watermelon, the significance of the hibiscus tea, or red soda pop, as my old man used to say, or red velvet cake. The red was reflective of the blood that we shed in this country, the blood that we shed for over 250 years of slavery, and that's why those items are so significant to a Juneteenth celebration if you've ever been to one. As an individual who was born in Texas, my father went back to Texas every year up until the time of his death to celebrate Juneteenth because that's how important it was to him and making sure that I and the rest of my family knew the importance and significance of Juneteenth. And it's important that we here as legislators know as well. But Juneteenth is so much more than that. It's a celebration of perseverance, of faith, and hope in our community. It's an example of how committed individuals from 250 years of bondage fought for this country, still defend this country, but in many ways are still denied the full rights and privileges of freedom in this country. It's also, Juneteenth is also the emancipation and the freedom of this country of its first original sin, and that of slavery. But despite the fact that we have removed the chains and bondages, many are still in bondage of poor education, lack of economic wealth. The wealth gap between African Americans and whites in this country today is at $360,000. The health disparities, African American women still face more challenges in childbirth than any other group in this country, have more infant mortality than any other group in this country, and we're undereducated more so than any other group in this country. But it's also this false narrative that African Americans are lazy. That's the farthest thing from the truth. You couldn't have built this country with 200 years of involuntary servitude if you were lazy. You would never have survived. These were some of the hardest working people in the world. And also to say that we didn't value education. At the turn of the 20th century, there were more institutions of higher learning, more HBC universities than any other colleges in this nation. We valued education. We still value education. It's a shame that our state and our nation doesn't invest at the same level in our HBCUs as we do in all our other universities across this country. It's the reminder, again, of the nation's dark past. The United States is a great country. It's in large part because it was built on the backs of slaves. But we will never reach our full potential as a country if we don't realize how far we've come, but more importantly, how far we still have to go to recognize free equality and freedom here. Slavery has ended, but despite the progresses we made, racism is still alive and well in this country. It even exists in California. So I'm here today to ask that we educate ourselves, and I appreciate all my colleagues every year. I've done this resolution every year since I've been in the Senate, And I appreciate all my colleagues who have come to me afterwards and saying, I learned something new today. And that's the purpose of this. And if there was ever a holiday should be a day off, it should be today. Because if anybody deserves a day off, it's African Americans who slaved in this country for 200 years. But we're here today. My colleague is here today because of the importance and the significance of this day. And I just want to talk about reparations for a few minutes. Over the last 2 years, I've had the privilege of serving as a member of the Reparations Task Force, and I thank our President Pro Tem for appointing me to that august body and just extreme challenging task of trying to figure this out. The task force is charged with identifying and compiling documentation on the institution of slavery that existed within the United States and to make recommendations on rehabilitation and restitution to African Americans here in this country. Next week, the task force will conclude and submit its final report and recommendations to the legislature and the governor. I encourage all Californians and every one of my colleagues to read the report. I'm going to say that again. I encourage all Californians and my colleagues to read the report. Everyone must be educated about our history, the real history. It's often said there's stories that made America, and then there's stories that America made up. Much of what we teach is the stories that America has made up. We need to stop whitewashing history. Reparations Task Force has documented California's role in slavery and decades of discrimination. California entered the Union as a free state, but it was a free state in name only. The first governor of California owned slaves. This legislature passed the fugitive slave law that allowed free people in California to be returned to slavery. If you were born here as a slave, you were treated as a slave. It's in there, it's documented. People can choose to ignore it. They can be uncomfortable with our history, but you can't deny it. The key takeaway from the Reparations Task Force is that the history of slavery in California and the racially motivated taking of black land through eminent domain, such as Bruce's Beach, the Inkwell, Sugar Hill in Los Angeles. We can go on and on and on. We can go to South Carolina, Hilton Head, for anybody here that's golfer. That was a former slave encampment for dozens of years until white folks decided we're going to cut off the water and force them back on the mainland. Now it's one of the best golf meccas in the country, but it was created by African Americans. And the racially motivated taking, like I said, of black land, over-policing, mass incarceration, and the denial of our home ownership through the practice of redlining have created generational harm that still exists today. A lot of folks don't even know zoning R1s, R2s, R3s was the result of eliminating restrictive covenants that was won in the Supreme Court in 1948 by Thurgood Marshall and Lorne Miller, two amazing African-American jurists. Lorne Miller lived in California. His son was a judge. His grandson, my dear friend Mike, who passed 2 years ago, was a judge. His sister is a judge. But they fought to eliminate restrictive covenants in this country. But now we fight to protect R1s and R2s. That was the extension of redlining and restrictive covenants. I hope the Juneteenth holiday will lead to a more honest education, discussion, and understanding. As I said, Juneteenth is a celebration of perseverance, of resilience, and of hope. I also want to leave you with a name, Opal Lee. She's 96 years old. She is considered the grandmother of Juneteenth. She fought for decades to make sure that this was a national holiday. 2 years ago, she was in the White House when President Biden signed it into law, and she received the first pen of that signing. Her life should be recognized for all that she fought through. And the reason why Juneteenth has such a significant meaning to her, because as a 12-year girl growing up in Texas, 500 white men came to their house on June 19th and burned it down. Imagine the impact that it's had on her for the last 96 years of her life. So I want you to know her name, She's a warrior. And she marched for years, 2.5 miles. And people say, why 2.5 miles? She said for every year that they was delayed in delivering the message that we were free. And 7 years ago, she organized a march all the way from Fort Worth, Texas to Washington, D.C., 1,400 miles. She didn't walk all of them, but she was there all along the way. Please know the name of Opal Lee. It is time everyone celebrate in our community and many contributions in the areas of business, science, medicine, art, music, and that African Americans have made. So colleagues, I ask you to join me today in recognizing the importance of Juneteenth, and I ask for aye vote.
Special thanks to my good colleague from Gardena. I rise on behalf of SCR 76 that celebrates today, June 19th, as Juneteenth, Emancipation Day in the state of California and across the nation. And it is a testament that Black people have and were enslaved longer than we've been free in this country. And Juneteenth is, in fact, the realest declaration of independence for Black people. It's a celebration that America historically became the land of the free for everyone in this country on Juneteenth. An estimated $20 trillion was amassed on the backs of enslaved labor, making the U.S. the largest economic power in the world. And as my colleague referred to it as the original sin, it was, in fact, the first entrance into a globalized economy that actually set our nation up to be the world power that it is, and it's also an original sin that we are still trying to correct today to ensure that every worker has the opportunity to be seen as a human being and to be treated with dignity and respect. And so we celebrate Juneteenth because all Black people weren't truly liberated until the Emancipation Proclamation, a policy, was realized, meaning that it was actually implemented. And I think that's what's really remarkable and something for us to think about here on the floor, that it's not enough for us to just pass the policies. We have to make sure that it's actually implemented and it reaches those folks who are most impacted and that it actually begins to change their lives. Beginning the following year in 1866, Black people kept alive that memory by commemorating this holiday around emancipation and annually celebrating with activities and events and good things like the red velvet cake that you have on your desk from the Black Caucus. It's important that we institutionalize the tradition of not just celebrating Juneteenth, but actually marking Juneteenth. And I hope that next June 19th, we won't be in the chamber. We will be able to celebrate with our constituents this important holiday. We have to acknowledge the resilience and the power of Black people in the allyship that led to the true abolishment of slavery, and to recognize that for generations, the demand for liberty and justice, that became a rallying cry and a beginning. And given what we're seeing in places like Florida, where we're denying that education, where there is an explicit effort to roll back the clock and to not teach our future generations on the significance of this holiday, here in California, we must stay steadfast in making sure that that history is known, that is taught through our ethnic studies programs, and that we ensure that we do all that we can not to undermine the progress that began so many generations ago, but to make sure that progress is in fact felt in every community. In California, we know that there are continuing, growing, widening disparities between Black and white residents, disproportionate gaps in life expectancy, access to quality jobs, income inequality, incarceration, and homelessness. These are all a testament to the complex governmental policies that Juneteenth lifted up, right, that are deeply rooted and institutionalized in anti-Blackness in this country. And it is our effort to, again, practice liberation and emancipation every day and making sure that those kinds of disparities are eradicated in California. Despite Black people having significantly contributed to the building of this country, including so many Black Californians, we unfortunately continue to bear the inequitable burden of so many disparities in this state and in this country. All Californians deserve to have equitable access to the good things in life, the things that help our families grow, that improve our communities for generation. That includes good jobs and opportunities to support and to sustain our families. If we're going to change the inequities that continue to persist, we must have the tools, equity mandates, that include basic things like monitoring, tracking, and evaluating so that we can see the progress that we are making to break the stubborn realities of systemic racism and the continued exclusion of Black people in this state and in this country. Juneteenth has taught us that the passing of policies alone are not enough, that true equity and justice requires active and vigilant engagement, and it makes sure that our governments, the state of California, puts in the tools, puts in the systems and practices that guarantees justice for all. This is the lesson, the true lesson today of 1865, and I am honored to be here and celebrating another marking of the Juneteenth celebration. Look forward for the state of California to continue to recognize, lift up, celebrate, practice, and mark this holiday for all, and that we eradicate the racist policies and practices that continue to hold us back, knowing that we want and demand a brighter future for our communities ahead. And with that, I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you. Senator Gonzalez, you were right.